When it comes to BoxCutter, there's a handy little tab on the Npanel that you can use to bring up the BoxCutter tab when needed, and then you can click on Activate BoxCutter in order to start BoxCutter. In the event that you don't like your tab or you want to remove it or even change the name of it, we can press F4 and go into our Preferences. And under Preferences in BoxCutter, we see that there's an option here for tab. We'll just go ahead and just call this little box and press enter, and we'll just click the X, and now our tab's name is little box, but we know that it's BoxCutter. We'll click on Activate BoxCutter, which will start BoxCutter, and we see that the Npanel is a pretty nice place in order to start out with BoxCutter if you're wanting to look at all the options available at your disposal at once, as well as get inside the behavior panel and adjust your preferences on the fly and just kind of have a very nice consolidated vertical experience for BoxCutter compared to the horizontal one that's offered through the top bar. And we found that there's a couple of users who are quite fond of it, and we definitely want to make it as versatile as possible for them. For that reason, you're able to go in here and collapse to help in the event that you're not needing help. But let's say that you did need help. The help starts off simple, talking about the things that are most relevant at this time, basically the things that you're only able to do at this time. So we will draw a box, and we see that immediately there's quite a few hotkeys at our disposal, ranging from pressing Tab, which will lock the shape, pressing H, which will toggle between a solid and a wire drawn shape. For times when your shape is getting in the way and you just need to see the wire outline, this is a way that I like to work a lot. You also see that there's G. We can press G to move the shape. We can press X in order to move the shape, constrained to an axis for X, Y, or Z in the event that you're trying to translate in that aspect. You can also press X, which also has the same ability to constrain to various axes. Here we are constraining it to Y, here we are constraining it to Z. However, because of our origin, more than likely something weird is happening. So let's set this actually to the second option, which is my favorite. And now if we press S and X, it scales properly. If we press S and Z, it actually scales the way that I would want it to, with my origin being exactly where you see it here with this dot. Rotation is the same way. We can press R to rotate the shape. However, we can see that with the lattice, rotation can get a little bit weird, so I'll more than likely be checking into that after this video. But if we were to just draw a clean shape and press Tab, and we were to just rotate this shape, we can see that it rotates the way it's supposed to without all that other matrix transformation causing a bit of complication with things. So if you are needing to just quickly get in and rotate a shape, you're able to. And then of course press G to just move it exactly where you would want it. And for the most absolute control possible, you can shift to live, press G, and move the shape up and just position it however you would want. And voila, you have absolute control over your shape. But let's go back into our in-tool hotkeys. So we're talking about G, S, and R. The next one is E and O, which we already discussed. Pressing E to extrude, E again to offset. We can even extrude and offset with the same key, not even having to press O, which I could just tell you that pressing O will just adjust the top, and pressing O over and over will continue to adjust the top without any change happening there. So that's basically O in a nutshell. We see that Alt Scroll will toggle the cutter history. So in order to show this in action, we will shift click this to live, and I'll tab into edit mode. So in edit mode, we will just add an edge loop and grab this face and extrude out, extrude this face out as well. And this is a pretty interesting shape. So we'll shift D, duplicate it over. And even though this isn't a cutter, we're just going to grab it and extrude this face down, extrude this face down. And this isn't really BoxCutter related, this is just Blender. And we're just creating variants. And the thing about these variants is because we're duplicating them, they're already in the cutters collection, which whenever you scroll to recall cutters, is going to recall them. So if I press 1, we see that we're on collection 1 and these are disabled. But let's draw a box, and inside this operation we could just Alt Scroll in order to recall these cutters that we made previously. And you can also do it with C by pressing C. You can toggle through the different types of cutters in order to get very different results. In fact, I will move this over to the edge so that way it's a little bit more interesting. But I just want to show some of the building blocks of what BoxCutter is and how you can take advantage of some of the systems in order to populate your cutter collection with shapes that may not be entirely active in your scene just yet. So eventually we'll add the support for users to be able to set specified collections as the collection they wish to have their cutters be recalled from, but for now it is constrained to the custom cutters location of just cutters, where we just place cutters when they're made. So the filter has also been unlocked for it, so you should be able to filter your shapes and recall them even if they're all named cube, 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 cube. So while we talked about alt scrolling and also C, which is basically the same thing but on a keyboard, L will toggle something called live, and we see that, you know, whenever you press L, a notification will show if you're using HardOps that will let you know that whenever you click, this shape will be kept. And that means that if I draw another shape, this shape will also be kept. And I will just keep shapes until I press L in order to disable that. So that's basically what live is all about. We can talk about modifiers at this time. Whenever it comes to drawing a shape, you can press B in order to bevel. You can press Q in order to contour bevel, which is also mentioned there. And that's how you can just quickly draw a shape with the bevel. Also, if you're wanting to bevel a shape in advance, you can actually toggle the bevel behavior up here at the top. And then whenever you draw a shape, it's actually beveled on the way in, so you don't have to press B every time. In the event that you're just trying to get a beveled box workflow going, you can just very quickly just draw shapes and not have to worry about them colliding with each other and having sectional issues that cause Boolean issues, because we have a weld position just right in order to ensure that your welds just work out. And there's been optimizations with this update to ensure that welds not being added in cases where it's not needed, which possibly might have been causing a little bit of a slowdown. The other one to talk about here is solidify, which if we continue in this thread, we can press T and we see that we're able to bounce this shape out using a solidify modifier. But we also see at the bottom that if you press 1, 2, or 3, you can change the solidify type. So if you're using HardOps, this behavior is a page out of the solidify book of changing the offset to 1, 0, and -1 in order to have a solidify that either pushes inward, outwards, or equilaterally from the center. So if we click and apply that, we are pretty much done with that. Talking about solidify, we'll draw another bevel box on the way in, and you might be wondering why the shape is not beveled in 2D but it bevels in 3D. That is because under beveled we have contour bevel on. So let's actually draw this shape, but we'll press Q in order to turn that off. So we press B, there we go. Now we have it toggled off, and let's try it one more time. There we go. So now we have the contour bevel removed. So whenever we draw the 2D shape, you can see that it's no longer here. So I'll be discussing the parameter for that as we get further in the video, and I'll more than likely be checking into that very shortly as far as why that parameter isn't just offhand for us to just quickly turn off there. But as you can see, now we can draw 2D shapes just on the fly. So now that we're talking about array, pressing V will allow you to jump into array, which as we can see, we're able to array and then move the mouse in order to adjust the distance. If we click to apply this, we can jump around to a clean side where we can actually see what's going on here. So we'll draw our shape and press V. And you might notice that things are getting a little bit choppy, and that's due to the amount of booleans that's happening and being kept live. With this shape, it is a cube that's being beveled to a certain amount and then multiplied by 3. So these things do kind of add up exponentially when it comes to calculating inside of Blender. But when it comes to array, we can just press V to jump back inside of array. And if you find that your array is just too far off screen, we see that there's a hotkey of Shift R, which will reset the adjustment and actually place them back at an axis where it's more manageable. And then by pressing X, we can actually change this on a 2D axis to choose which direction we want this to go. And then next door to that, we have Z in the event that you need to rotate the axis that the array is actually working on. So with array, due to the amount of additional geo being added. Of course, use this sparingly. It is one of those things that can rapidly add up to you and bring your computer down to its knees, no matter what type of PC that you're using. So the final hotkeys to talk about here are the swapping keys. So we'll start over with the new scene, and I'll press N, and we'll jump over to Little Box and activate Box Cutter. And we see that there's hotkeys at the bottom for X, K, J, Y, and A. So let's talk about them. So as you know, I'm a big fan of box. I love just drawing boxes, making cuts, and then just repeating them. So here I am, just doing my usual thing, my usual favorite type of box cutter test of just getting in here and just performing some graceful cuts. So now that we have our cuts, I can just draw a cut across this, bring it down, and we'll press Y in order to extract it. So now this shape has been extracted, and after extraction, it's been made into a custom cutter, where now when I draw it out, I can hold Shift in order to draw this proportionally and actually repeat this shape just as I extracted it from this area. So currently it supports the X and the Y, but Z is more than likely to come in the future, still as a topic of discussion. But we consider everything, whether it's a small incremental increase, a victory is a victory. So I'm happy to announce that we now have proportional custom cutting inside of BoxCutter, which we refer to as one-to-one cut. And here you see me just using this shape over and over, just keeping the exact proportions of the area that has been extracted. So here I am, just quickly jumping from cut to extract and back to cut again. Let's say I was using box and I wanted to cut this out. Sometimes I will start with a cut and I'll press X to cycle over to a slice and then apply. And because I started off as a cut, I know that on the inside I saw what was given here, and I also can kind of trust what's going to be given here. So sometimes I'll start with a cut and then transition into a slice just because I know that it will give me a much more predictable result. So that's one way to just quickly get the most out of knife, or get the most out of slice whenever you're just using X as a hotkey. The next part of slice that I want to talk about is recut. So let's just draw a box and we'll press X. And if we press Alt X, we can actually perform what's called a recut. And a recut is a cut that will basically cut the first form of the shape and ignore the other Boolean history that's happening, allowing you to kind of get a clean interjection of a clean shape somewhere that you can just begin playing off of, kind of like you see me doing here. It's something that comes in really handy. It was a bug that we found with Slice whenever we were attempting to fix it that ended up becoming its own feature. So recut is one of those things that aren't talked about very often, but I definitely recommend giving it a shot. If you're in the process of slicing, here I am slicing again. Let's say that I want this piece, but I actually want a piece that I can manage and start over again from. We'll just perform a recut like so, and more than likely I would need to cut that out. But now I have this fully renewed piece of block here that I can just begin working from. And so I found all sorts of creative uses for this throughout my work. And so it's something that has definitely found its own home inside of BoxCutter, and it's just basically a mod shape of slice. So continuing on, the next hotkey that you're able to toggle between is inset. So this shape has already gotten rather complex. So the important thing to keep in mind with inset is that whenever you perform an inset, this is what happens. The shape is duplicated. We probably apply it. I assume we do not apply it. We then put a solidify modifier on it. In fact, we'll go in local mode to just prove this point. And then we put a solidify on it. And then we try to use a Boolean to cut that out. And so sometimes, as you can see from this very cruel example, that insetting can sometimes be a little bit difficult because of it duplicating something with such a complex history and then doing this with it. So it's given me some ideas for alternative types of insets that can be done in the future. But just to kind of set up for what you're about to see, because I already know if we click and draw a cut and start as a cut, and we switch to a slice, and then we switch to an intersect, and then we switch to a inset, we see that the inset breaks down a little bit. So people love writing about why inset doesn't work out, And I just want to emphasize that inset is basically making a duplicate of this entire mesh history and then trying to slice it and cut it into itself based off of a solidified version of itself. So it may or may not work at certain thicknesses. So, I mean, if you're coming over from a CAD background, you may want to temper your expectations whenever it comes to polygons, but it's just something I want to get off my chest. The next shape I want to talk about, or the next transition I want to talk about, sorry, is intersect. So we'll draw this circle and we'll just cut inside the shape, but I'm going to press X to switch to a slice and then X to switch to an intersect. And we see that the only thing left behind is what's inside the circle. So I will pause this and we'll just hold shift and just roll the wheel until we get a nice smoothish result with this. You know, we see the bullet really just kind of giving us the business there, but with this we're now able to conform this entire shape into a cylinder. And we could do the same thing with this thing. We could just draw a shape, perform a cut, you know, press X to turn it into a slice, press X to turn it into an intersect, and just have fun with things. So these transitional shapes that these transitional operations that you're seeing me use via X are just there to make your life easier. You know, all the things that we have as in BoxCutter aren't there because you have to use them. They're there as suggestions of ways that you could work, but we know that users are more than capable of finding their own favorite way to work and then using it to the best of their abilities. So let's go into box, and I'll just draw a quick box, and we see that the next one that we want to talk about is J. J will switch over to a make box, which is a type of union. If we bring it out, we see that this box is just an additive box, nothing much to talk about here. That's it. Sometimes I like to add on to things and then follow up with the box and then cut back in the middle and give it a bevel of almost the exact same size just to kind of give it a nice little grow / cut off. And then of course we can get creative with this and just drag this back, press Y, get an extraction, and then repeat this shape here, even with this extra lip around it, just for an extra kind of sci-fi flair to it. But just like that, we're able to just quickly just draw shapes, and repeat them on the fly. So that's the reason that there are so many hotkeys, is that once you get used to BoxCutter in the way that we intended for it to be used, you should be able to find a relatively powerful workflow in there for you, regardless of whether you're using a pen or a mouse or hotkeys. And we want to make sure that the best option that you need is right in front of you at all times. And then of course our belief is that what are you going to do after a cut? Another cut, more than likely. So if that's the type of thinking that you have, then BoxCutter is definitely the tool for you. But with that, hopefully it's given an understanding of how you can use the Npanel, as well as understanding the help to basically get the most out of BoxCutter. For the most part, I was just talking about the help. So the options themselves, there's nothing really much different between these and the top bar, but just to go over all of the hotkeys in a nutshell, this chapter is for you.